So for the last talk, we're going to look into the future of autism spectrum disorders and how it relates to communication sciences and disorders. And this is probably not unlike a lot of the other areas of communication science and disorders. There's a lot of things you can focus on, but what I ended up picking is technology. And I think that this is going to play a major role in the future for kids with autism and probably across a lot of the disorder in general. Or a lot of other disorders that you might see in general. So technology is specifically related to people with autism because there are some advantages that really tie into how this disorder tends to present. And some of that is that this is an area of strength often and an area of interest for individuals with autism. So we know from research they cue into screens better than they cue into people sometimes. And sometimes that's problematic, but with technology going the way it is, it also might be a real advantage that we can tap into. And so they've done studies with video modeling, if they do live modeling versus video modeling, and there's some evidence that shows maybe kids cue into the video modeling a little better because it's a screen format and they're able to kind of pay attention and tune in more than when they're looking broadly at a bigger scene where there might be more to confuse them. And so we know that using a strength and interest can help to kind of bolster some of those skills where there may be challenges for individuals with autism. So some advantages for kids with autism now that kind of apply across the board are that these devices are now portable. So there's been this rise in personal communication devices, whether that's an iPhone, an iTouch, a tablet, PC of some type, smartphone, PDA. I guess PDAs are on their way out by now, but things are more portable and they're also more common. So it used to be that if a child with autism was using a dedicated communication device, it made them stick out. There was always thought of, oh, is this going to be stigmatizing because they have to carry this around? Now I think it's probably more stigmatizing to not have a device. At least when I go into the high schools, there's kids everywhere using their smartphones all the time. And so it's a lot more common and it makes, it works. It works with the world that we live in. And so that works for kids with autism. It might help them kind of fit into the broader community in a way that they haven't before. I think there's also advantages for practitioners who are tapping into the technology. So there's this increase in efficiency. We used to, if we wanted to make a picture schedule for a kid, I would take a picture and then have to go print it out and laminate it. And now we have these, we can make picture schedules on tablets for kids. We can do things really efficiently that we couldn't do before. And so I think that helps us as practitioners. Also, technology is accessible and affordable compared to what it used to be. And so if we wanted to advocate to get a kid a device before, sometimes it would be $6,000 for a device that they would use for communication. Now you can get a device that can be used for communication but can be used for a whole host of other things for much less money. And so we can maybe get that money from the foundation to help support that, or get insurances to pay for something that costs a little bit less than one of these devices used to. There's also smart boards in classrooms. Are you guys the generation that grew up with smart boards? Okay, you didn't have them in your classroom. I obviously didn't either. I did have them at the very end of when I was working in the schools. And schools all over the place have these smart boards now. And they're so interactive and easy to use. And the kids are better at using them than the teachers are. They often figure things out quickly. So it's just there. It's in the world. It's present. So I think it's important to tap into. I don't want to leave this screen without addressing some disadvantages or some things that people might kind of throw up as protests to this. So one thing you hear a lot of with kids with disabilities is it's not durable. They're going to break it. They're going to throw it. Something's going to happen. I put this picture of this case up here. So there's a lot of cases. My iPhone case is like indestructible because I drop my phone all the time. So there's ways to protect devices that adults use too. But this is one that's maybe looks a little younger, but it also doesn't look, if you got it in black, it would look pretty normal. So The bright orange maybe has a little pop to it. But I don't think durability is as much of an issue as people were concerned about in the past. I think another argument you might get is that they'll lose it. They won't keep track of it. Something will happen. I think if you give a device to someone and you teach them how to use it in a meaningful way, if you give them things that they can do on it that help them or that entertain them, they're going to take ownership of that. Like there's 3-year-olds who know exactly where their mom's iPhone is at all times because it matters to them. So if you give them technology that matters, I don't think we have to worry about that either. I think the one thing that maybe is a pretty legitimate concern is it going to be distracting? Is it going to take away from learning in some other way? And that I think about is teaching the individuals how to use it appropriately, okay? I think we've all been distracted by technology, and we've all been the recipient of, or been on the other side of that. And so that happens too. I mean, how many of you have friends who you're out to dinner and they start texting? Everyone's distracted by technology. So saying these kids, it's gonna be more distracting than it is good. I don't think that's a fair argument, but I think you'll have to instruct and provide support around that to make sure that it's used appropriately and to make sure that it's put away when it needs to be put away. So, okay, so there's a lot of exciting uses for technology that people are trying to do with and for people with autism. There is a man named Tony Gentry who is an occupational therapy professor. He's at VCU in Virginia. And he is doing incredible work with assistive technology. And some of it is with individuals with autism. He actually has his focus is assistive technology and using it, but he does it with veterans that are returning from the war and stuff. So he has a very kind of broad population base. But he's doing amazing stuff, a lot of it around getting adults to be independent in the work environment. And some people with very significant disabilities that are independent in the work environment because of technology. So I've listed a couple things that I think might be areas that you would tap into for kids with autism. Self-management. So we all do that all the time. We're monitoring our behavior. We're making sure that we're making the right facial expressions, that we're kind of maintaining the appropriate mood for the situation that we're in. We make sure that we're on time to things. I set an alarm to make sure I remember to take the trash out on Sunday nights. So we all do these things that kind of help us to manage our time and our behavior, our emotions. Individuals with autism might struggle with this a little more, or some of the aspects of it. And so this is an example that I set up for a child who maybe is getting either overly anxious or overly kind of excitable in classes. And it's just, you can set an alarm, it cues them, maybe it's a vibrating alarm, it cues them, they kind of pay attention, where's my anxiety at, how excited am I, do I need to use a self-regulation strategy? And so thinking about setting things up like that, where they start to check. The idea isn't that they need an alarm every 30 minutes for the rest of their life. The idea is that they get used to checking in with themselves and are able to become independent and say, you know what, I might need to take a break from class right now because I'm feeling anxious and I'm tapping my foot so loudly that it's disrupting the whole class, or whatever the case may be. So thinking about how we can use very simple software on like an iTouch or a smartphone or tablet to help with that. Another area is social stories. So these are evidence-based. The NAC, it's considered an established intervention. So thinking about a story that kind of tells about a routine or some type of social behavior, and they're used. Now, this is an app that I downloaded onto my iPad that is extremely easy to use. You can type in the text, you can draw decorations, you can add a picture, and so you could make a social story in probably 5 or 10 minutes and take actual pictures of the kid doing something. So I just think the possibilities are kind of endless there. Another thing that's nice about that is they can have a whole bunch of social stories that are right there for them to access. We have kids that go back to the same social story over and over again to help calm themselves or give them cues. And if it's on an electronic device, they can pick whatever one they want and access it. There's also text-to-speech function that can speak those stories in some cases. So, and that was a free app that I found. So, video modeling. It used to be that we came in with, the VHS recorders, and we would have to cut it and make sure we had the right parts of the example that we wanted to show. And now you could do a video model in, again, 10 seconds. You could take a short video of a peer doing something that you wanted the student to do and use that to help model a behavior for them. Or you could take a video of them performing a behavior, either the way that you expected them to or not, and help them reflect on that. And so I think the possibilities with a lot of this technology are really endless, and there is a lot there to offer that's not kind of the bad side of technology. The last one I have here is visual supports. And so thinking about, there's a high school teacher that we worked with at one of our schools who, the one who has an iPad for each kid, and she has their schedule on it each day. She has different apps depending on where they are for math or reading that they can access worksheets, and they have some independent work time while she's doing small group work with other groups of kids. And so everything is on that. And then she uses the smart board to do these literacy activities with kids who are kind of early readers, and she's putting visual supports up, and they're reading things like they read Hamlet. They were reading Hamlet, I think, or some Shakespeare, and she has it all adapted and up on the smart board, and they are paying attention to it because it's a screen and it's something that they like looking to. So there's just so many things that you can do. They're also starting to do work with virtual worlds and avatars. So kids that have high-functioning autism that maybe can experience some of those social interactions in this avatar world. It's a little bit less intimidating than when you're trying to do it in person. There's, a barrier there. There isn't a lot of research on that, but people are starting to explore it. I think another advantage is that with the kind of global connections, people with autism are finding each other and they're establishing networks. So there are entire websites dedicated to Aspies, they call themselves sometimes, so people with Asperger's syndrome. And they have these groups and they have friends that are online that maybe they wouldn't have been able to find in their high school or at their workplace or whatever the case may be. And so I just think that there are many ways that the research and practice could expand that would support individuals with autism. Another thing I will say is that jobs talk that I went to, or the conference I went to that was talking about employment opportunities, technical fields, people with autism tend to be very detail-oriented, doing things where you have to kind of go through websites and find where coding errors are, or just even testing if everything works. That is an area where they can really excel. And so thinking about helping them to learn some of these technical skills that would give them jobs in the future. I know they're kind of trying to do that across the board for kids. So I think one of the biggest holdups to technology is us, and not you all, because you all probably have the technological experience to actually not hold this up. But I think as practitioners who didn't grow up in a world of using this technology all the time, I don't always know what to do with it. I'm not great at thinking about that, but I think like your generation, the people that are coming up behind you, you are going to be the innovators, and you will probably push things forward in a way that can't happen while there's a generation who didn't even have computers in their classrooms when they were in kindergarten, So we're still working on this, and I think that people with autism and their peers and the young people have a lot to teach us, so we should make sure we're paying attention. Other uses of technology from our perspective, practitioners, data collection. You can collaborate with each other so much easier with some of the technology that's available. There's, even just tracking data on your phone or kind of ticking off things that the child is doing. With professional development, there's things that are available on the web that, webinars, online courses, online conferences, these things that are so much more accessible now. And so I think if you have a specific area of interest, whether that's autism or something else, you can probably find things online that will help you to be learning the rest of your life without having to always travel somewhere to go to a conference or something like that. Teaming and collaboration, I think kind of the advent of the video chatting, Google Docs, all these things that you can work with others and share documents is helpful. I will say a note there, you obviously have to be really careful about privacy. So those online things aren't necessarily secure. You might not want to use names on those, or you don't want to use names. But that doesn't mean that you can't have a document set up that's tracking student 1 in the class or something, and the teacher and the SLP and the occupational therapist are taking notes, or something that you're communicating with parents. And you can have almost like virtual notebooks going back and forth. I just think there's so much there. And then telepractice. So I actually don't know a lot about telepractice. You guys will probably learn more in your classes. Obviously, that wasn't something that when I was coming through, but I'm not sure how that will pan out with individuals with autism. Young kids tend to not like to sit still. It's hard to do telepractice. You might be working with their parents and coaching them on how to work with students. Or it might be that this screen interaction, especially if we're thinking about adolescents or adults that maybe have some like kind of higher social skills needs, that telepractice might be the best way. Or kids who maybe could benefit from counseling or something, things like anxiety and depression occur a lot in autism. This might be a lot more comfortable for them than a face-to-face interaction. So again, I think that technology is going to change not only what we do with individuals with autism, but also kind of what we do as a profession. So I think there's a lot of exciting things on the horizon, and I can't even imagine what the changes will be in the next, it's changing so fast. Any questions related to thinking about kind of technology moving forward or the future in autism? Yeah.
Like you were saying for the intervention, how it's one-on-one and then you put them into groups, is that kind of the same idea with technology in that you start them out using this technology and then try to introduce them to more face-to-face communication?
Okay.
Or how does that work?
Yeah. So, and actually I was talking to someone at the break with that. So that is one of the dangers, right? If the focus is totally on the technology, you might lose that social piece. And so I do think it depends on what you're using the technology for. For the things like self-management and stuff, you're probably going to have coach them through it, but some of those things are geared towards independence. And I actually think looking at how they function independently in schools and jobs is probably going to be a really big focus for technology. When you're talking about communication, especially that emerging level of communication, I think it won't be as easy to figure out how you can use technology together to get some of those interactions. But like if you think there's like paint functions or something, you could make sounds while you're doing like a paint function and kind of make a game out of it, or doing something that was interactive, taking silly pictures and showing them to each other or something like that. So I think there's ways you can incorporate it, but you're right, you want to be careful and make sure that the technology doesn't become the end in and of itself, and that there is still something social about it if you're coming at it from kind of an SLP perspective. Yeah.
I know you talked about data collection and something like that, but I took a class on assistive technology here, but it wasn't hosted by someone who was in this field. But we talked a lot about the apps that are used in therapy. How accurate or appropriate do you think it would be to use something that took the place of a formal evaluation? Because we looked at those apps a lot. And they have them for receptive and expressive language too.
So I did actually mean to talk specifically about apps. One of the problems with apps is like it is growing so quickly. I can't remember what the count is, but I think there's like 10,000 apps that come out just for autism or something. There there's an app to keep track of autism apps. So you have no control. Like we could never really keep up with those and keep a running list of which things are good and which apps are good and which apps are bad. But they do have lists of apps that are kind of strong apps to use for intervention. As far as assessments go, I actually haven't thought about that as much. I mean, I know there are kind of technology assessments that look at some of kind of the executive functioning skills, and it has to do with response time, and so there's advantages to using technology. But I personally would say as a clinician that I don't think an app will ever take the place of an assessment. I think it could be used as to supplement or augment that assessment, and there might be some apps that can track data in a different way. One example of technology, this isn't an app, but the Lena device that I published a paper on, it is this digital recorder. It's about this big. It's for younger kids, and they can wear a vest and wear it all day. And it keeps track of the number of child vocalizations, the number of adult words, and the turn taking that goes on. But it's all done with this like computer algorithm that a computer scientist developed. So it's a very kind of crude, rough measure. But you get a lot of information, and you get it efficiently. And so you couldn't use that standalone, but you could use that to look at, okay, we're working on turn taking. Let's send this device home, once a week and see, or you're doing home programming with the parent and working on routines, and you want to know when they're getting the communication in. They can wear it every night, and you can see, from 7 to 8, there's a lot of good things happening. What are you doing from 7 to 8? Oh, you're doing book reading? That's a good time. So you could use it in that way and think about technology to support kind of your feedback, but it wouldn't ever replace, an assessment or just kind of natural observation. But good question. I'm curious about those apps because I did not know that they had like full receptive language assessments and stuff. I mean, I guess we do stuff on the computer all the time, like take personality tests or things like that, so it makes sense. But yeah. Other questions?
All right, so I know in my case, my parents aren't always like the most technological savvy. Do you think that might be an issue? I know, like you said, that
good question.
like taking technology home it could be an option for some students.
So that parents might not be ready for that as much as the kids are. I think that definitely will come into play at times. And I know even just when I was using the communication devices like Dynavox, which were kind of these dedicated communication devices, it's like if something went wrong at home with the device, there wasn't always like, it's like, oh, how do we fix this? And I think in some cases you could even meet with resistance to technology at times. Although given how kind of rapidly the uptake is happening right now, if you're using kind of the smartphone type things or tablets, they'll probably be less resistant, but they might not know how to use some of the functions. And there are there are apps that function as communication devices now, but it might not be easy for parents to figure out how to navigate and help their child learn to use those apps. And the parents might not always know what their child is doing on their smartphones, which I think can be said for probably parents of all kids. So it is one of those things. It's a tricky balance of knowing how to push it and advocate for productive use while still respecting kind of those opinions about using technology. Good question.
I wanted to get some of your thoughts about a direction that you said you might be going in the future and talking more about the high schoolers and adults with autism, and kind of talking about what, maybe not necessarily the technology, but overall, what does life look like after you're out of the protection of the Individuals with Disabilities Act, and like what does life look like after public school for a person with autism?
That is a really good question, and it is a really depressing answer. If you want to know the truth, they've done a lot of research on outcomes. So you will hear parents or teachers describe the process of leaving the school system is falling off the cliff, where you go from this eligibility model, or when it's a given you're going to get services, to having to apply for service, and many people don't meet the requirements to get services as adults, or it's confusing how to access those services, or they're not available. So, and then the other thing that they've done a lot of research on is just looking at the outcomes for adults with autism. And we know that they really struggle with independence. So I can't remember what the percentages are, but I want to say 80% of individuals with autism are living in their homes, or like 75%, and then 90% are living in their homes or residential facilities. There's very few people that are living independently. There's work is very problematic. So finding and maintaining employment that's full time, that's enough for them to live on their own. So the outcomes are really alarming, and these are for some people who are going to college after high school, like really gifted, bright people who clearly have a lot to offer. And we're not preparing them in a way that allows them to succeed as adults. So I think it's really important that we look to that. And I think some of these like technology things can play a role in thinking about how can we use that to take advantage of their strengths, to help them be maybe more independent in the workforce once they're out there, and think about how we can do that. So yeah, it is. It's a really alarming statistic, especially when you think of the fact that soon that will be 1 in 66 of the people that are adults. We need to figure out what we're doing before they turn 18 or before they turn 21 to better prepare them for life in the real world. So, good question. All right. Well, thanks so much for listening.